Ready for your story, Ellie? All right, let's have story time. I thought that since you're stuck at home, I could entertain you every once in a while with a story. So I'm going to read you a story from James Herriot. James Herriot's one of my favorite storytellers. He was a veterinarian in Scotland in 1930s, 40s. So I will just read a story of him. This is a book of favorites of his. And I'll just read one here and there every now and then. I might read a couple this weekend just to give you something to do since you're at home or supposed to be at home. Huh? A pair of proper boots for Jimmy. Hello, hello, I bellowed. Hello, hello, little Jimmy piped just behind me. I turned and looked at my son. He was 4 years old now and had been coming on my rounds with me for over a year. It was clear that he considered himself a veteran of the farmyards, an old hand versed in all aspects of agricultural lore. This shouting was a common habit of mine. When a vet arrived on a farm, it was often surprisingly difficult to find the farmer. He might be a dot on a tractor a half a mile across the field. On rare occasions, he might be in the house, but I always hoped to find him among the buildings and relied on a few brisk shouts to locate him. Certain farms in our practice were for no apparent reason distinctive in that you could never find anybody around. The house door would be locked, and we would scour the barns, the cow houses, and the fold yards, where our cries echoed back at us from unheeding walls. Siegfried and I used to call them the no-finding places, and they were responsible for a lot of wasted time. Jimmy had caught on to the problem quite early. There was no doubt he enjoyed the opportunity to exercise his lungs a bit. I watched him now as he strutted importantly over the cobbles, giving tongue every few seconds. He was also making an unnecessary amount of noise by clattering on rough stones with his new boots. Those boots were his pride, the final recognition of his status as veterinary assistant. When I first began to take him round with me, his first reaction was the simple joy of a child at being able to see the animals of all kinds, particularly the young ones, the lambs, the foals, the piglets, the calves, and the thrill of discovery when he came upon a huddle of kittens in the straw or found a dog with pups in a loose box. Before long, however, he began to enlarge his horizon. He wanted to get in on the action. The contents of my car boot were soon as familiar to him as his toy box at home, and he delighted in handing out the tins of stomach powders, the electuaries and red blisters, the white lotions, and the still revered long cartons of universal cattle medicine. Finally, he began to forestall me by rushing back to the cow for calcium and flutter valve, rushing back to the car for calcium and flutter valve. As soon as he saw a recumbent cow, he had become a diagnostician as well. I think the thing he enjoyed most was accompanying me on an evening call. If Helen would allow him to postpone his bedtime, he was in heaven, driving in the countryside in the darkness, training my torch on a cow's teat while I stitched it. The farmers were kind, as they always are with young people. Even the most uncommunicative would grunt. Ah, see, you've got the apprentice with you, as we got out of the car. But those farmers had something which Jimmy coveted, their big hobnailed boots. He had a great admiration for the farmers in general, strong, hardy men who spent their lives in the open, who pushed fearlessly among plunging packs of cattle and slapped the rumps of massive cart horses. I could see he was deeply impressed as he watched them, quite often small and stringy, mounting granary steps with 12 or 16 stone sacks on their shoulders, or hanging on effortlessly to the nose of huge bullocks, their boots slithering on the floor, a laconic cigarette hanging from their lips. It was those boots which got under Jimmy's skin most of all. Sturdy and unyielding, they seemed to symbolize to him the characters of the men who wore them. Matters came to head one day when we were conversing in the car, or rather my son was doing the conversing in the form of a barrage of questions which I did my best to fend off while trying to think about my cases. Those questions went on pretty well nonstop every day, and they followed a well-tried formula. What is the fastest train, the Blue Peter or the Flying Scotsman? Well, now, I really don't know. I should say the Blue Peter. Then getting into deeper water. Is a giant train faster than a phantom racing car? That's a difficult one. Let's see now. Maybe the Phantom Racer. Jimmy changed his tack suddenly. This was a big man. That was a big man at the last farm, wasn't he? He certainly was. Was he bigger than Mr. Robinson? He was launching into his favorite big man game, and I knew how it would end. But I played my part. Oh, yes, he was. Was he bigger than Mr. Leeming? Certainly. Was he bigger than Mr. Kirkley? Without a doubt. Jimmy gave me a sidelong glance, and I knew he was about to play his 2 trump cards. Was he bigger than the gas man? The towering gentleman who came to read the gas meters at Scaledale House had always fascinated my son, and I had to think very carefully over my answer. Well, you know, I really think he was bigger. Ah, but the corner of Jimmy's mouth twitched up craftily. Was he bigger than Mr. Thackeray? That was the killer punch. Nobody was bigger than Mr. Thackeray, who looked down on the other inhabitants of Darrowby from 6 feet 7 inches. I shrugged my shoulders in defeat. No, I have to admit it. He wasn't as big as Mr. Thackeray. Jimmy smiled and nodded, well satisfied. Then he began to hum a little tune, drumming his fingers on the dashboard at the same time. Soon I could see he was having trouble. He couldn't remember how it went. Patience was not his strong point, and as he tried and stopped again and again, it was plain that he was rapidly becoming exasperated. Finally, as we drove down a steep hill into a village and another abortive session of tum-tee-tum-tum came to an abrupt halt, he rounded on me aggressively. You know, he exploded, I'm getting just about fed up with this. Well, I'm sorry to hear that, old lad. I thought for a moment. I think it's Lily Burlero you're trying to get. I gave a swift rendering. Yes, that's it. He slapped his knee and bawled out the melody at the top of his voice several times in triumph. This put him in such high humor that he broached something which must have been on his mind for some time. Daddy, he said, can I have some boots? Boots? But you've got some already, haven't you? I pointed down at the little Wellingtons in which Helen always rigged him before he set out for the farm. He gazed at his feet sadly before replying. Yes, I know, but I want a proper pair of boots, like the farmers. This was a facer. I didn't know what to say. But Jim, little boys like you don't have boots like that. Maybe when you're bigger. I want them now, he moaned in anguished tones. I want proper boots. At first I thought it was a passing whim, but he kept up his campaign for several days, reinforcing it with disgusted looks, as Helen drew on the Wellingtons each morning in a listless slouching to convey the message that his footwear was entirely unsuitable for a man like him. Finally, Helen and I talked it over one night after he had gone to bed. They surely don't have farm boots in his size, do they? I asked. Helen shook her head. I wouldn't have thought so, but I'll look about in any case. And it seemed that Jimmy wasn't the only boy to have this idea, because within a week, my wife returned flushed with success and bearing the smallest pair of farm boots I've ever seen. I couldn't help laughing. They were so tiny, yet so perfect. Thick hobnailed soles, chunky uppers, and long rows of lace holes with metal loops at the top. Jimmy didn't laugh when he saw them. He handled them almost with awe, and once he got them on, his demeanor changed. He was naturally square-set and jaunty, but to see him striding around a farmyard in corduroy leggings and those boots, you would think that he owned the place. He clumped and stamped, held himself upright, and his cries of, "Hello, hello!" took on new authority. He was never what I would call naughty, certainly never destructive or cruel. But he had a bit of imp in him, which I suppose all boys need to have. He liked to assert himself, and perhaps unconsciously, he liked to tease me. If I said, "Don't touch that," what do you think he did? You think he touched it? Oh my goodness. If I said, "Don't touch that," he would keep clear of the subject in question, but later would give it the merest brush with his finger, which could not be construed as disobedience, but nevertheless served to establish his influence in the household. Also, he was not above taking advantage of me in awkward situations. There was one afternoon when Mr. Garrett brought his sheepdog in. The animal was very lame, and as I hoisted him on the table in the consulting room, a small head appeared for a moment at the window which overlooked the sunlit garden. I didn't mind that Jimmy often watched me dealing with our small animal patients, and I half expected him to come into the room for a closer look. It is often difficult to locate the source of a dog's lameness, but in this case I found it immediately. When I gently squeezed the outside pad on his left foot, he winced, and a tiny bead of pus appeared on the black surface. "He's got something in there, Mr. Garrett," I said, "probably a thorn. I'll have to give him a shot of local anesthesia and open up his pad." It was when I was filling the syringe that a knee came into view at the corner of the window. I felt a pang of annoyance. Jimmy surely couldn't be climbing up the wisteria. It was dangerous, and I had expressly forbidden it. The branches of the beautiful creeper curled all over the back of the house, and though they were as thick as a man's leg near ground level, they became quite slender as they made their way up the bathroom window to the tiles of the roof. No, I decided that I was mistaken and began to infiltrate the pad. These modern anesthetics work very quickly, and within a minute or two I could squeeze the area quite hard without causing pain. I reached for the scalpel. "Hold his leg up and keep it as steady as you can," I said. Mr. Garrett nodded, pursed his lips. He was a serious-faced man at any time, and obviously deeply concerned about his dog. His eyes narrowed in apprehension as I poised my knife over the telltale drop of moisture. For me it was an absorbing moment. If I could find and remove this foreign body, the dog would be instantly rid of his pain. I had dealt with many of these cases in the past, and they were so easy, so satisfying. With the point of my blade, I made a careful nick in the tough tissue of the pad, and at that moment a shadow crossed the window. I glanced up, and it was Jimmy all right, this time at the other side, just his head grinning through the glass from halfway up. The little blighter was on the wisteria, and there was nothing I could do about it, except give him a quick glare. I cut a little deeper and squeezed, but still nothing showed in the wound. I didn't want to make a big hole, but it was clear that I had to make a cruciate incision to see further down. I was drawing the scalpel across at right angles to my first cut when from the corner of my eye I spotted 2 feet dangling below the top of the window. I tried to concentrate on my job, but the feet swung and kicked repeatedly, obviously for my benefit. At last they disappeared, which could only mean that their owner was ascending to the dangerous regions. I dug down a little deeper and swabbed with cotton wool. Ah, yes, I could see something now. It was very deep, probably the tip of a thorn, which had broken off well below the surface. I felt the thrill of the hunter as I reached for the forceps, and just then the head showed itself again, upside down this time. My word, he's hanging by his feet from the branches, and the face was positively leering. In deference to my client, I had been trying to ignore the byplay from outside, but this was too much. I leaped at the glass and shook my fist violently. My fury must have startled the performer, because the face vanished instantly and I could hear faint sounds of feet scrambling upward. That was not much comfort, though, either. Those top branches might not support a boy's weight. I forced myself back to my task. "Sorry, Mr. Garrett," I said. "Will you hold the leg up again, please?" He replied with a thin smile, and I pushed my forceps into the depths. They grated on something hard. I gripped, pulled gently, and oh, lovely, lovely, out came the pointed, glistening head of a thorn. I had done it. It was one of the tiny triumphs which lighten vets' lives, and I was beaming at my client and patting his dog's head when I heard the crack from above. It was followed by a long howl of terror, and then a small form hurtled past the window and thudded with horrid force in the garden. I threw down the forceps and shot out of the room along the passage through the side door into the garden. Jimmy was already sitting up among the wallflowers, and I was too relieved to be angry. "Have you hurt yourself?" I gasped. He shook his head. I lifted him to his feet. He seemed to be able to stand all right. I felt him over carefully. There appeared to be no damage. I led him back into the house. "Get along and see Mommy," I said, and returned to the consulting room. I must have been deathly pale when I entered, because Mr. Garrett looked startled. Is he all right?" he asked. Yes, I think so, but I do apologize for rushing out like that. It was really too bad of me, too." Mr. Garrett laid his hand on my shoulder. "Say no more, Mr. Harriet. I have children of my own." And then he spoke the words which have become engraven on my heart. "You need nerves of steel to be a parent." Later at tea, I watched my son demolishing a poached egg on toast. Then he started to slap plum jam on a slice of bread. Thank heaven he was no worse for his fall, but I still had to remonstrate with him. "Look, young man," I said, "that was a very naughty thing you did out there. I have told you again and again not to climb the wisteria. Jimmy bit into his bread and jam and regarded me impassively. I have a bit of streak of old hen in my nature, and down through the years, even to this day, he and later my daughter Rosie have recognized this and developed the disconcerting habit of making irreverent clucking noises at my over-fussiness. At this moment, I could see that whatever I was going to say, he wasn't going to take it too seriously. If you're going to behave like this, I went on, I'm not going to take you round the farm with me. I'll just have to find another little boy to help me with my cases. His chewing slowed down. I looked for some reaction in his morsel of humanity, who was later to become a far better veterinary surgeon than I could have ever been. In fact, to quote 30 years later, a dry Scottish colleague who had been through college with me and didn't mince words, he's a big improvement on his old man. Jimmy dropped the bread in his place. Another little boy, he inquired. That's right. I can't have naughty boys with me. I have to find someone else. Jimmy thought this over for a minute or so, and then he shrugged and appeared to accept the situation philosophically. He started again on the bread and jam. Then in a flash, his sang-froid evaporated. He stopped in mid-chew and looked at me in wide alarm. His voice became a high quaver. Would he wear my boots? What do you think? If he's naughty, you going to let someone else wear his boots? Well, I think he better would if he's just going to be naughty.
No, because his dad has to love him forever.
Well, yeah, but you can love somebody forever and ever, but if they're bad, you have to do something to make it better, don't you think? All right. Tell everybody good night.
Good night.
Hope you enjoyed it. Turn it off. Oh, my word.